Oh, good.
All right, I'll get out of your way.
So it's gonna fit right under.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll start, we'll make it, very succinct. So our problem was, well, when we first started off, we all felt like in our classrooms that word problems were an issue. The students really have to pay attention to the wording and what they're actually being asked to do. So our audience was, we ended up doing my first grade class, so a bunch of 6 and 7-year-olds. And a huge issue in my room is when I give them a problem, they have no idea whether they need to add or subtract or if they're comparing. And so before we get into the actual math that they need to do, we do spend a lot of time just looking at the problem itself. So I'll say to them, I don't care what the answer is. I don't want to know what the answer is. I want to know what you're going to do. Are you going to add? Are you going to subtract? Are you comparing? And as our beta test group discovered, it is a little bit trickier than you would think for first grade. The wording can be a little bit tricky. So
it's challenging.
I know. So
First grade.
we wanted to create a game that would have them just focusing on the wording in those word problems in order to determine whether they were adding, subtracting, or comparing. So that was kind of our we were keeping it very simple, which, as you found out, it wasn't as simple as we had thought it would be. We had to scale back, so I'll let my friends here go on. I don't want to step on any toes.
So I'll just go into the development of the game. So first, obviously, when everybody put in their suggestions for what games to do, we all got paired up. Personally, myself, I'm not a teacher, but I'm in an algebra class in high school. I know Yumilka's in high school, Jimmy's in middle school, and Sarah's in elementary school. So just like Sarah was saying, we kind of had to, we were all confused on which direction to go in. Like we wanted to base it off of someone's class, but the higher level math got a little bit trickier, and we wanted to focus on just the base word problems. So that's when we focused on just Sarah's class. And when me and Jimmy had a problem, we were coming up with some of the questions. We were thinking that they would solve them and go into equations and all that, and then that got too much and everything. So we really had to scale it back. And then once we figured that out, we tried to figure out what game to base it off of. So we ended up basing it off of Candyland because we thought that was very good a map to base it off of, and it was a fun map as well. So
And they all probably know it. And
Right.
it's
yeah,
age appropriate.
exactly. Yeah, so I'll just show you the game board here. So it looks like that.
Very whimsical.
Very colorful, has little shortcuts in it as well.
It was fun to play.
Yeah.
All right, so I'll leave it up to the next person to go
So,
into. the game.
Yumilka, if you want to play the video, then we can
Yes.
help you explain it.
Okay.
So I can. So this would just be for 2 players. We'll be playing against one another. We wanted to keep it very simple. So to start off the game, they're going to roll the dice to determine who gets to go first because we want to keep those very basic and very concrete so there's no fighting. So there is a deck of cards. Put it in here. And they have to, the cards are face down and they have to pick a card. And on the card, there's different colors at the bottom, and the color coordinates with a spot on the game board. Okay, so we have these cute little pieces. Thank you. These cute little pieces that they are using to jump. And so let's say I picked up this card. I would say, it says Alice had 8 bunnies and Jim had 6. How many more dice did Alice have than Jim? So if they got it correct, and this would be covered by these little holders here.
So each of these two will start right here.
It would go in, so the answer is at the bottom, and this was something nice that our beta test group helped us with too, or had suggested. It'll go in the holder, so the person who is reading the card, they won't see the answer. They'll have to put it in this little guy here. And so they won't be able to see it, okay? okay, then that's a good way for them to check at the end, did I get it right or not? Okay, and on here it says addition, subtraction, or comparing, so it's nice for them to have a visual aid and remind them there are 3 choices. So for here, if they figure out, yes, okay, this is indeed comparison, that little green dot here indicates that on their game board,
Yeah, let's say they were red, they would go to the first green space.
yes, so they get to travel to green, okay? And so that's where they're gonna go. Go ahead. This is So one player asks the other question. Like I said, this is here for them to double check. Feel free to jump in. Like we said, it goes to the corresponding game piece. Yeah, give milk though. Make that for us. So one thing that we had talked about, and it was funny because there was one day that I wasn't here, and they were kind of testing through. I don't know if you wanted to talk about that, Jimmy, but I don't want to step on your toes.
It's okay.
They had said maybe if they got it wrong, the kids would move back, and many of you, I guess, had quickly said, "Oh, you're going to have the kids move back." And I know for me, if I told my kids that they lost and were moving back, it would be devastating. So we decided if they got it wrong, they just wouldn't move forward. So there wouldn't be a consequence.
They would just stay where they are.
Yes, because that would be catastrophic. So. Do you want to talk about the challenge?
Yeah, sure. So we made a challenge card in here as well. So it wasn't just about addition, subtraction, or comparison. So we'd actually have the kids, figure out which word it was, and then they had to solve the equation. So if one of them was, the one Alice had 8 bunnies and Jim had 6, how many more did they have than Alice had than Jim? They'd have to say 2 more. And if they got that right, then they were allowed to cross the nearest bridge that they had.
Yeah, wherever they were. If they were here, they would go to the red one, go up, and then they would be there. So it would be ahead of some other players. They got it right.
We also said the kids had the options. They could choose not to do the challenge card if they didn't want to, because that wasn't the purpose of the game.
It's kind of like they're making a decision.
Right.
So just kind of reiterating what Jimmy was saying. You will go for forgetting anything you wanted to add. So the end piece of the game is whoever makes it all the way to the finish
Finish over here.
wins the game.
And just as a bonus part of the rules, if you were on the game board, right, and you got red, and then the next question was red, and you went here, you can also still move up to the next, all across the bridge.
Bonus.
Yep. And
just so through the beta test, we got some really good feedback. Like I said, I'm an 8th grade teacher, so I teach a high school algebra class for the 8th graders. I teach a pre-algebra class. So Sarah was gone, so I'm like making sure we had our stuff together. And as I was presenting, people were very, very nice to me about their criticism, which was great. You guys were very nice. But they're like, I have like a 5-year-old at home, and I'm not really sure that the verbiage that you're using, that they could really read that. I was kind of getting really into the 8th grade mode of like, I don't even remember what I said, but it was very more complicated, and I'm kind of forgot that I was dealing with 1st graders. So we had to kind of change the vocabulary and make it pretty simple with what we're asking them. And we wanted to start with having them solve equations, like Brian said, and we were like, you know what? I think the addition, subtraction, comparison would be a good start. And then we were going to try to throw in challenge questions. And I don't know if you guys know Candyland. If you draw like the Grandma Nutty or whatever. I don't know.
Grandma Nutty.
I don't know if that's what it was.
It is.
Is that what it is?
Grandma.
There was like a one in a tree too, right? It was like a pear.
Oh,
guy.
yeah, yeah.
There's Princess Frostine.
Yeah.
My daughter played
Drop
this game.
cats.
Played it.
Look, that's exactly right. So we were like thinking about, okay, let's have like a math themed. How fun would it be if we had math themed characters? The kids would probably love it so much. It kind of got overcomplicated where we were saying, okay, well, if they get it right, they can jump there, but if they get it wrong, what happens? And then what happens, I know that in Canyonland, if you were already near the end and you pulled the card, you had to go back. And we were just really like, these first graders can't handle all
Too
this,
much.
so we kind of took that out and we did the bridges instead. So we made it kind of, everything was a forward progression instead of anything going backwards, which is really great. And then we also had the awesome, I think it was Brian, we weren't sure I wasn't sure when Sarah wasn't here, how good we were going to do with a first grader reading to a first grader and then having them interpret. So we wanted them to be able to see it. So having this little, very high-tech device that is, has the answers, and the other group that we beta tested with had this idea to have the kids be able to see what the answers actually were, their options were, and then have the kid turn it around to the other player and say, here's your question, you can go ahead and read it yourself if you'd like, so they can kind of read it for themselves instead of listening to someone and then responding. And then you just pull it out and you can see the answer and they can go from there. Which is cool.
And the self-check really is important too. I know for my kids that both of them might not be sure, or there might be an argument. Well, no, I think it's that they can go and see it, and that actually really is a big deal for them to be able to self-check.
Yes, we needed a way for them to get the right answer, which is great.
And just as the last thing about reflection of working with this group, I just want to touch upon that we used texting back and forth, we emailed back and forth, and there was a couple of things throughout the whole game group thing that was a little bit of struggles to get over, but there was like 1 week when Jimmy wasn't here for conferencing, 1 week when Sarah wasn't here for conferencing, and a couple times when Yumilka wasn't here, so we had to kind of jump off and figure out where can we do things, where can we connect with other people and do things where we can do it enough with just me or just two of us, and figure that out and still be connected at the same time. So, and it worked out in the end where, them being gone for the week didn't really matter all that much.
Communication
The
was good.
communication was good. And the week before, we made sure everybody was on board, so that person that was out that next week would have all their stuff in and ready to go, so people who would be there would be able to show the rest of the class, basically.
And I just realized I didn't realize this card was on top because I meant to throw it out. During our beta test, they pulled out this card and they read it. It says, Alice had 8 bunnies and Jim had 6. How many more mice did Alice have than Jim? They're like, what? Mice and bunny? And I didn't even realize when I read it, but I put it on top so I could throw it out.
It's like those things on the internet, we were saying that say, if the roof is 25 feet, or if the house is 25 feet high and there's an alien on the roof, what color is the spaceship?
Yeah.
So, sorry about that.
I think you guys did a really great job of really keeping in mind your audience.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? Because they're first graders. So
Especially
you can't
when
get
you're
all,
talking about like,
Can't
you
get
know
all
what I mean?
complicated.
Like,
go back and
complexity.
have tears
Well,
and like
and-
flipping the game board.
And that's a theme, I think, across all the groups tonight. And that's maybe one place also where the focus of an instructional game is going to be different than if you're just creating a game, is that you do have to be willing to pare things back because you don't want the time to be taken up explaining to students how to play the game, right? It's about the instruction. You want to get them to the material as quickly as possible. And I think almost every group tonight has had some version of that, of, it was
Scaling
too
back,
complicated, or there were too many rules, or, but this is a great example. I think this is, were any of the other groups not high school related? Oh, there's middle school, right? Middle school. But you got, first grade, obviously the youngest group, but that's maybe the clearest example of that is you really do have to kind of just say, bite off the smallest little piece, and the fewest number of rules and the most, that's why a game like Uno works for kids from 4 or 5 years old and up, because the rules of playing the game are so simple and they're right there. So I think this is a good example,
Yeah.
and hearing what you guys said of just realizing you have to just keep stepping it back, but then the end result is, I mean, yes, is the game going to win any awards? Probably not, but you're going to get your you're going to get your kids. I mean, from a but instructionally, it will get your students to the actual instructional goal much faster, which in the end is what we're really about. I mean, as fun as games are, and we love to just play games all day, unless that's what you teach. But I was glad to hear that, and I'm glad we had at least one group that was dealing with a very young age group, just to kind of see how that plays out in the whole framework of game creation.
Yeah.
Just kind of a follow on thought to that. I think what I found, and see it in the other groups also, is you come to a framework of a game that works, but then where Candyland can be from 3 to 8, or whatever that range is. You have that framework, but then you have to really narrow it down because those word problems aren't going to work for an 8-year-old like they would for a 3-year-old, or
Right.
something like that. Or,
Right.
so it's even when you have that style of a game that works, we even narrow it down even further.
Right.
Because you have to drive that content at a certain.
Right. I mean, not wanting to penalize, not wanting to have people go backwards.
Right.
And actually, I think I remember when my daughter was very young and we would do Candyland, like, if you drew one of those special cards that would make you go back, we wouldn't make her go back. We'd be like, okay, we're just going to ignore that card.
Not me. I made that go back, man. It's like, you learned the hard way.
But you know what, I think when you say that too with the game and going back, like, this is supposed to be like a positive thing.
Right.
Make them want
And
to
you have
do
some
it.
kids that
If
will
you
shut
do
down.
that,
Yeah,
then
if you're
it's
doing
like,
Then you're
that,
missing
they're
the
not
whole
gonna
Right.
point.
yeah, so you have to, like,
Right.
talking about your
We
audience.
said
You
all of
can't
that.
have,
Very
like,
careful.
Although there was a certain drive to Candyland. I mean, come on. You wanted to play all the time.
Right.
Exactly.
But yeah, we definitely I appreciated creating a game with having somebody who has experience with the audience, because I can't imagine making something for a group of people when the group that you're making it with doesn't know the group of people. It would be like almost impossible. You'd have to test it so many times before you could actually figure it out. So like having her to go back and say, would this work, would this work, would this work, she was really kind of the foundation of all those questions.
You know, that actually makes me think of administration and teachers. When like administration tries to like implement things
Oh.
and get the staff to do things
Yeah.
or tell, but they're not like,
True.
Not connected.
Yeah.
They're not connected.
and those,
Absolutely.
the administrators that are connected always implement it so much more better than the ones that are disconnected. It's the same thing in anything. So it's a totally true statement.
And definitely speaking from keeping audience in mind and going back to Sarah and checking in with her to make sure it would work. We wanted to make sure that it would work for the students so that because the whole point of the game was for them to understand where these words can fit into word problems. It's a fun game, but the understanding part is so you can match them up when you have them on like a test or you have them in the classroom themselves.
Yeah. Well, and like with this, where there's really 3 answers. So in the
Yeah,
course of a
exactly.
game, it's repetition.
Right.
It's a
Right.
lot of repetition, which maybe for a 12th grader, that's going to get boring really fast.
Right.
But at a 1st grade level, repetition is what it's got to be about. It's
And I-
just, you got to do it as many times as
And
possible.
I think when we
just to,
beta tested it, at first it was like kind of slow, and then you kind of get the hang of the wording and what you're looking for, and like what keywords, and you kind of are learning throughout that the gameplay anyway, which is kind of the goal too. So a kid who's going in cold could by the end could kind of figure out like, okay,
Yeah.
I know what to look for now.
And that age too, isn't that repetition? Like, they want to hear the same stories over, they want us to do the same, so the repetition, in addition to having an educational focus, it also is, like, that is.
I mean, that's a completely valid educational approach, is repetition.
Right.
They will get it. Like, once you've done something 20 times or 30 times or 50 times, it's like, well, yeah, 10,000 hours, right?
Thanks for
All right.
waiting.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
well, all right.
Now, don't you feel bad?
So now we are back to the original plan for next week. We'll still meet at 5. We'll go through some wrap-up stuff and evaluation stuff and all that, and have you out of here by 5:45. unless you
tape right here. So the game, that's why the game board doesn't stick. It doesn't fit under there.
Thanks,
Well,
everyone.
we can do this.
The
Ready?
box is big
I think
enough,
I
so-
broke it.
Ready?
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Ready? Go ahead. Put it. Oops, I broke that. Double sided tape is strong. Put
And
it
I
down.
chew in the bag, lady.
Put
What's that?
I too am the bad.
Yeah,
hand.
well, we've got, you know,
Thanks again.
my wife's always
I was
calling
like,
students all
Bye.
over
over
the place.
vacation,
She's got
I was
those enormous
thought this was
IKEA
gonna be so
they
easy.
don't have
Yeah,
that.
I got
box.
She can stuff
I'll just
full
make a
of
little
cheese.
corner of it,
Yeah.
all good.
Well,
Every
I'm
paper
like,
bag you can
This,
Yeah.
all the drawing was like fun and stuff. This took
Nice
me
effort today,
forever
Jimmy.
to implement. Thank you.
You made it.
Thanks.
Did you win?
I'm gonna send this in to get some awards. No, we lost. That's the depressing thing.
Yeah.
Jim,
What?
did you burn the box here?
So I was doing the inside, and there's a candle here. And I kind of
Oh,
like this,
no.
And I'm like,
What's that smell?
and look, I see that. I go, oh no. So we had a little bit of a
Don't burn your house down for
my dad's
for your project. Yeah.
Oh.
But thank you for sticking around. And
Oh,
letting us
sure.
do
No,
this. I appreciate it.
I'm glad it worked out. We had a plan B, but it's good that we got it out of the way too, and now it's just done and can go into next week clean.